This lecture will focus on what happens after a behavior occurs. In behavior analysis, we call these stimulus changes after a behavior consequences. In our everyday language, people often use the word consequences to mean something negative that happens. This is not how we use it in ABA. It only means what happens after. Please keep this in mind as we continue in our discussion. Let's just reiterate one more time. In ABA, consequences do not mean something bad or unpleasant. It just means something that happens immediately after a behavior. That's it. One of the main things that happen after a behavior is called reinforcement. Reinforcement is a process by which a consequence that follows a behavior strengthens the behavior. A behavior can increase in strength by increasing in frequency, duration, or magnitude. A reinforcer is the stimulus that is introduced or changed after the behavior occurs. Let's review that quickly. Reinforcement is the process by which a consequence that follows a behavior increases or strengthens that behavior. A reinforcer is the thing that was presented or changed after the behavior occurs. If you say hi to somebody and they smile back and say hello, and then you say hi to more people after that, we can say that reinforcement occurred. How did reinforcement occur? We can assume that the person smiling and saying hi as a consequence to your behavior functioned as a reinforcer and increased your greeting behavior. The likelihood that something will reinforce a response depends on the degree a person values or prefers it. This is determined by the quantity, quality, and the current level of motivation. What we find reinforcing, or what will function as a reinforcer, is not static. It can change from day to day and even moment to moment. There are a class of reinforcers that do not require any learning to establish them as reinforcers. These include food, water, breathing, air, sleep, comfortable temperatures, scratching an itch. These things are also called primary reinforcers. Most of these will increase in value if the person has been deprived of them for some time. For example, eating will be more valuable if you haven't had any food in days. Taking a drink of water will be more valuable if you haven't had anything to drink in a few hours. Conversely, there are many stimuli that have become reinforcing through learning processes. These are called conditioned reinforcers or secondary reinforcers. These reinforcers have been associated with primary unconditioned reinforcers throughout our life and have now taken on reinforcing properties themselves. The best example of a conditioned reinforcer is money. As an infant or a young child, we would not necessarily find a $100 bill reinforcing. It has no value for us. But as we get older, we learn that money is associated with access to all sorts of other reinforcing things. You give $1 and you get a soda. It has been paired with other reinforcers and thus becomes desirable in itself. Natural reinforcers happen spontaneously as a normal part of our everyday activities. You put on a nice outfit and someone stops you to compliment you. You walk into a dark room and you flip the light switch and it becomes bright. Programmed reinforcers are contrived or planned and are meant to encourage behaviors. Some examples of these would be paychecks, bonuses, extra credit assignments, door prizes, etc. When we speak of reinforcement, we need to realize that there are two different types of reinforcement, positive and negative, but both work to increase or strengthen behavior. The positive in positive reinforcement should be considered in the mathematical sense, not in an emotional sense. Positive in this sense does not mean good or nice. It just means added or increased, like a positive number in math. Positive means that a stimulus has been added or increased in response to the behavior, and the behavior is then strengthened. If you put $1 in the soda machine and get a soda, The next time you are thirsty, you'll probably do that again because your money-giving behavior was reinforced by getting the soda you wanted. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, means something is taken away or reduced, and the behavior that followed is still strengthened. The negative and negative reinforcement has nothing to do with bad or unpleasant. It just means something is subtracted, just like a negative number in math. A common example is the annoying sound that comes on in your car before you put your seatbelt on. Our seatbelt buckling behavior is increased because when we do this, that horrible sound is taken away. Another example would be taking aspirin for a headache. Taking aspirin takes away the discomfort of the headache. And so, in the future, if we have a headache, we will take aspirin again. Positive reinforcers vary from person to person and from day to day within the individual. But we can categorize some of the most common types in these broad areas. Tangibles, which would include things like foods and gifts. Activities would include trips, watching TV, going to sporting events. Social, a category including praise, recognition, hugs. Feedback, which would be something like having information given on our performance. Tokens, that are symbols to use to obtain other reinforcers, like money or poker chips. Or covert reinforcers, which are things we do internally, like self-praise or self-talk. I'm sure you could list many more in each of these categories that you find reinforcing, and you probably find a few on this list not reinforcing at all. This is an important aspect to understanding reinforcers. Just because someone thinks something would be of value or desirable to somebody doesn't mean it actually will. Let's recall that negative reinforcement strengthens behavior and only has to do with removing or reducing some sort of condition following the behavior. Negative reinforcement strengthens behaviors that reduce aversive conditions. Aversive conditions means something that is unpleasant, undesirable, uncomfortable, etc. Aversive conditions can be overt, like annoying sounds or bad smells, or they can be covert, like feelings of anxiety, pain, or sadness. We learn to escape aversive situations when they occur, and we learn to avoid aversive situations when we can predict their occurrence. Let's think back to that annoying car sound when the seatbelt is unbuckled. We learn to escape that aversive condition by buckling our seatbelt. The buckled seatbelt turns off, removes the aversive condition of the noise. We may also learn to avoid that aversive condition by beginning to buckle our seatbelt even before we turn on the car. We learn to avoid the aversive condition altogether by engaging in a particular behavior. So, how can we identify whether something will be a reinforcer? Since we can only know if something will be a reinforcer if its presentation after a behavior increases or strengthens that behavior in the future, what we typically do first is try to identify potential reinforcers, those items or activities that might be valuable to a person. We can do this through direct assessment or indirect assessments. Direct assessments can include observation of the individual in the natural environment to see what they tend to gravitate towards or spend their time doing. It could also be direct testing of different stimuli to see what the person selects in a given situation. In indirect assessments, we might use things like interviewing the person to see what their likes or dislikes are, or maybe interview family and friends. We could also give checklists where the person selects items or activities that they enjoy. Identifying potential reinforcers is one of the most important components involved in intervention aimed at changing and/or teaching behaviors. A new behavior is developed best if it is reinforced immediately. The longer you wait to deliver a reinforcer after the behavior has been admitted, the less potent that reinforcer will be, and the lower chance that reinforcement will have actually occurred. A new behavior is also developed best if it is reinforced after every response. Remember, we learn to engage in behaviors because those behaviors have been reinforced. Reinforcement is the process by which a consequence is delivered following a behavior, and that behavior increases or strengthens in the future. If we aren't reinforcing the behavior, there's no possibility for that behavior to be strengthened. Another process by which behavior is changed is through extinction. Extinction is a procedure or condition in which reinforcement is terminated for a previously reinforced response. If a behavior was previously reinforced by positive reinforcement, we no longer allow those reinforcers to occur following the behavior. If a behavior was reinforced by negative reinforcement, we no longer allow escape or avoidance of the situation to happen following the behavior. Let's discuss a few examples. If a child yells and screams in the store and mom always gives them a lollipop to quiet them, extinction would require that we no longer give the lollipop in response to the behavior. Over time, with all else remaining the same, the yelling and screaming behavior would be extinguished because it is no longer being reinforced by receiving a lollipop. If another child yells and screams in art class because they hate it and the teacher always sends them out of the room, extinction would require that we no longer provided escape from art class and made the student stay in class. Over time, with all else remaining the same, the yelling and screaming behavior would be extinguished because it is no longer reinforced by escaping art class. For extinction to be successful, you must have control over the sources of potential reinforcement. That means for the child in the store, we must make sure that dad doesn't get fed up and just hand a lollipop over, or that a nice stranger doesn't come over and try to calm the child by giving tickles and making goofy faces. For the student in art class, we must make sure that a substitute teacher doesn't come in and send that child out of class. For extinction to be ethical and durable, you should always teach a competing behavior, or, preferably, an alternative behavior. For the child at the grocery store, it might be teaching them to ask for a lollipop when they're calm. For the child in art class, it might be teaching them to ask for a break. For the example shown below, a smoker might create a self-management plan where they abstain from smoking altogether and immediately, but program for a competing behavior of gum chewing and an alternative behavior of meditation. The final category of consequences we will discuss is punishment. Just as with many of the terms we've been discussing, ABA does not load the word punishment with any emotional meaning. Punishment involves an unpleasant or undesirable event presented or changed as a consequence of a behavior and results in a weakening or reduction in the occurrence of that behavior in the future. Just as in reinforcement, there are two categories of punishment: positive and negative. And again, the positive and negative mean add or subtract, not good or bad. Positive punishment is an aversive stimulus or condition, a punisher, added to the environment, contingent on the occurrence of a behavior. Some examples would include spanking, yelling, snapping a rubber band on your wrist. However, just because it seems like it would be unpleasant, it is only actually punishment if the behavior it follows decreases in the future. Let's think about this in terms of a child getting scolded. Many times, parents will scold children thinking that this will reduce their behavior, that this is a punishment. But if the child continues to engage in the behavior that resulted in the scolding, did it have a punishing effect? No. It is only a punisher if the behavior was reduced. Negative punishment is the removal or reduction in a pleasant or desired stimulus condition contingent on the behavior occurring, which results in the reduction of the behavior in the future. The most common examples of these are timeout, losing privileges like TVs or using phones. Again, it is only a punisher if it actually reduces the behavior in the future. Many times children are put in timeout thinking that this is a punishment, but if the class or activity that they are engaged in prior was actually something they were trying to escape or avoid, we have not actually applied a punisher by using timeout, but applied a reinforcer. One final note on punishment. In ABA, interventions that are designed to make use of as many reinforcement strategies as possible and only using punishment-based strategies as a last resort and if used, always in combination with reinforcement strategies.